Hello and welcome to Viewpoint. I'm joined today by Dr. Taras Kuzio, an expert in Ukrainian affairs. Dr. Kuzio, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We've had Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko in Europe in recent days, in Brussels, at the European Union. He's been at NATO headquarters as well. He had a press conference there with Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General. It all sounded very positive. They have a roadmap for cooperation. Poroshenko made some jokes about how they have so many areas that they're now working together in. It's simply amusing. Seems like it's business as usual. I mean, it's good news, sure, but more of the same.
Well, it's Ukraine first signed up to work with and cooperate with NATO back in 1994, so long ago now, and it was one of the most active country in the former USSR outside the Baltic states in NATO's Partnership for Peace program, and also in individual Partnership for Peace programs with key countries like Britain, the United States, Canada, and elsewhere. So there was an extensive program going on for many years. This, of course, declined and became marginalized under Yanukovych from 2010-2013. So now we've just gone back to basically the Kuchma-Yushchenko very intensive cooperation. Of course, but in a different era with Russia's invasion of eastern Ukraine.
So the stakes are higher now, aren't they? The
stakes are higher for many reasons. A, because of the conflict in eastern Ukraine. We now have Vladimir Putin finally admitting there are, he's not gone the whole hog and said there are Russian forces there, but he said there are intelligence forces. There's still Russian troops. Whether you're military intelligence special forces like the two captured or troops, they're still troops. But the most important thing, I think, is...
just on that point of Vladimir Putin saying this, I mean, how do we read this? Is this a good thing? Because now, I mean, on the same day that Poroshenko met Stoltenberg said, yes, there are still Russian troops in Ukraine. Putin, in his press conference earlier that same day, said, OK, yes, there were some Russian military specialists in Ukraine. I mean, both sides are talking with the same kind of language now. This is good?
Well, NATO are talking the same language. NATO have been saying this since the get-go, since the beginning. It's more that European Union wants to fudge this issue and, kind of resolve the Ukrainian problem and kind of file it away and hope it's over and done with the Minsk agreement. NATO's very different in that it's had to face up to the fact that the Cold War in some ways is not over, that we have a Russian threat. Which is music to some people's ears in the military, of course, because they get resources.
And the hawks in Washington.
Of course, hawks in Washington. But it's not going to, I mean, hawks and hawks. I mean, the next US president will be around in the White House in a year's time. And that US president, whether he or she, I have to be careful here, Democrat or Republican, is going to be more critical of Russia. And that means they're going to be more likely to support the US Congress, both houses, both parties, in providing defensive military equipment to Ukraine. So Putin's actually losing time here. I mean, he's doesn't have much time left in terms of what he wants to achieve in eastern Ukraine. He's hoping to do that by lobbying various EU countries like the sort of soft southern Europe, Italy, Greece, and elsewhere, traditionally being pro-Russian.
In terms of sort of getting rid of sanctions on Russia,
getting rid of sanctions,
getting past this.
Yeah, and NATO's always been singing a different tune, that the Russian troops are there, they're infringing the Minsk agreement, they're not transferring control of the border back to Ukraine by the end of the year, which they're supposed to do under the Minsk agreement, they're not removing their troops, and everybody understands that Putin used the Minsk I and Minsk II agreements to basically build up the separatist forces into a 40,000 strong army, which is bigger than 15 out of NATO's 28 members. I mean, that's, he did that during Minsk I and Minsk II.
Now, why did he use those agreements in that way? In what sense did they allow him to do that? They bought time.
Well, because the Western European leaders like Germany and France wanted to sort of resolve this issue without further military conflict, shall we say. So they said, let's give peace a chance, the old John Lennon song, and, if that works, then there's no need for sending military equipment to Ukraine. But of course, that actually works against Ukraine, which is the country that suffered the aggression. Because during the same time, Russia's beefing up and transforming this ragtag army of tractor drivers and coal miners from last year into a formidable force of 40,000. Now, even if Ukraine today wants to reintegrate the Donbas region controlled by the separatists, what do you do with those 40,000 troops? And what do you do with that region? So I don't think the EU really has an answer to that. And I don't think Putin very much, he doesn't respect the EU like he respects NATO. Remember that from a Russian point of view, the EU is just a US puppet. It's the US dictating to the EU to apply sanctions to Russia, and therefore we have to sort of work on individual EU countries to maybe demolish those sanctions. But the key thing for Ukraine, for NATO, isn't just military cooperation. That's been going on since '94. What Ukraine needs from NATO is also heavy support in terms of reforming the other sectors of Ukraine's security forces, especially the security service of Ukraine, which is still quite Soviet in its organizational structure. For example, Ukraine has 34,000 people in the 2 security services. Britain's 2 security services have 6,000 people. So this is overmanned. And also, Ukraine has a massive border guard force, bigger than the US, which is incredible. And also the Ministry of Interior, which is now being reformed. At least there's some progress there with American assistance on creating a police force, National Guard. But we still need to deal with these other forces, which are also important in the fight against separatism and Russian subversion. So it's not just a question of the military. We can thank Putin, by the way, for forcing Ukraine finally, for the first time since 1991, to invest in the military. And this is the first time ever that Ukraine's done that. So there's some progress there, but we need to work on these other areas.
So, I mean, given all of this, I mean, what future do you see for the Donbas region? It seems that nobody really wants it anymore. And in fact, I mean, Ukraine as it is now, I mean, it seems to be moving forward anyway with a free trade zone with Europe. Perhaps a visa-free regime might come into effect sometime next year. I mean, that's all fairly positive, in spite of the fact that we still have this area, which is not in the control of the Ukrainian government. It doesn't have control over its whole border. So
right.
why, if you're sitting in Kiev, if you're the government in Kiev, why would you bother trying to actually get back this territory?
Well, I don't think many people are thinking along those lines. At the same time, we have to, there's two ways to look at this. At the same time, this is not a frozen conflict in the Donbas, unlike, say, Moldova, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. This is an unresolved conflict, because in those 3 other regions, separatists with Russian backing defeated central governments. In this case, neither side achieved its objectives. Separatists did not take control of the entire Donbass and bring Kiev to its knees. The Ukraine side didn't defeat the separatists either. They were about to last year, but Russia invaded. So it's an unresolved conflict, and therefore it's unstable, and therefore the Minsk agreements, will hold only to a certain extent. There's still conflict and shooting every day.
Do you agree that this is essentially now a lever for the Kremlin? They want to ratchet it up. They can. They want it to bring it down, take the pressure off Kiev. They can do that too. And is that why we need to neutralize it? Because we can't. Kiev can't afford to have this hot zone.
To a certain extent, but Putin didn't achieve his objectives at all, really, in the Donbass. Yes, he's got this frozen conflict, this region, as you say, neither side wants, and Ukraine's going to just take a step further now in proposing the idea that separatists should be removed from Ukrainian citizenship. Now, that seems to be quite radical, but at the same time, they're saying the same thing in France after the terrorist attacks, that terrorists should be also removed from citizenship. I mean, citizenship requires a certain amount of loyalty to the state. And if you're a separatist or a terrorist, then you're not loyal to that state. So if Ukraine goes that step further, then these people are no longer Ukrainian citizens.
Yes.
And so that you are kind of shifting the problem to Russia. I think that that's what's going to slowly happen. There isn't really a mechanism for expelling this region from Ukraine. You could maybe do a national referendum.
That's like a reverse Crimea, though, isn't it?
It's like a reverse Crimea.
Ukraine itself then having a referendum about getting rid of this sort of separatist territory. I mean, would the public really go for that, do you think?
Opinion polls say that the majority of Ukrainians support Ukraine's territorial integrity. But then if you ask a second question, are you willing to fight for that territory? It's a different matter, right? In places like West Ukraine, very, very patriotic, they will look at this region of Donbas and say, they're not even Ukrainians. I mean, why are we fighting to keep an area where they don't like us, they don't even think of themselves Ukrainian, what's the point? And also the cost of reintegrating this region. This is a destroyed industrial infrastructure, coal mining region. The cost of just reintegrating that is going to be huge, and Ukraine can't afford that. So there are lots of reasons why I think that slow process of disengagement of this region will happen. But, you know, President Poroshenko, as the guarantor of the constitution and the territorial integrity of Ukraine, can't officially say, to hell with you. He can't expel it.
No.
But I think that's what's going to gradually happen. The problem here, though, is more this question for future membership of EU and NATO is, will the people in Brussels then hang this problem over Ukraine's head and say, you can't join NATO or EU because you have conflicts in your territory? I mean, that's the argument used by those countries.
Is that the elephant in the room?
That's the elephant in the room, and it's used by countries that don't want enlargement into this part of the world. It's hypocritical because, as somebody pointed out, East Germany was a frozen conflict for 50 years, and yet West Germany was let into EU and NATO, and Northern Cyprus is controlled by Turkey since 1974, and yet Cyprus is a member of the EU. So let's not have two double standards here.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Kuzio, I'm afraid that is where we'll have to leave it.
Thank you.
Because we are out of time. But I thank you very, very much for coming in to Viewpoint.
Thank you.
You've been watching Viewpoint here on Ukraine Today. I've been joined by Dr. Taras Kuzio, an expert in Ukrainian affairs. That's all we have time for. Join us again next time.